Welcome to the Account Management Secrets podcast. I'm your host, Alex Raymond. Today, we're tackling a topic that every B2B leader needs to prioritize: customer retention. If your team is stuck focusing just on chasing new deals and you're losing sight of keeping your existing customers happy, this episode is going to change how you think about growth. My guest, Cudby, is the CEO of Alignment Growth Strategies. She's also the author of the book, Keep Your Customers. She's spent over 20 years helping companies reduce churn, boost customer loyalty, and increase profits. In today's episode, we cover why retention is more valuable than acquisition for long-term growth, the 5 mistakes companies make that can lead to churn and how to avoid them, how the Mint method creates simple, repeatable processes for keeping customers, and the power of playbooks to create alignment and improve the overall customer experience. As you'll see, Ali's insights are clear, practical, and they are designed to make an immediate impact in your business. So if you're ready to stop losing customers and start driving real growth, let's dive in with Cudby. Hey, Ali, thanks so much for being here. It's great to see you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So this is a really fun topic today for the Account Management Secrets podcast. It's how to reframe our thinking around churn and loyalty and retention and growth and all these really important topics for account managers and leaders, frankly, across the globe. And I thought one of the things we could talk about at the beginning is this misperception, or at least in my view, it's a misperception, or rather total overuse of energy in so far as everyone is just so focused on top of funnel metrics and activities. And we often lose sight of the power of retention, loyalty, to drive growth within our companies. You know, like if I look at it, so many CEOs, CROs, et cetera, are just focusing on getting new deals in the door, like refining their sales process, all the whole go-to-market around that sort of top of funnel stuff, which of course you need to grow a business. And but the flip side is there's not that much attention paid to what happens once we have a customer, right? Like what are the really positive economic dynamics that happen once we have a customer here. And I know this is a topic that you spend a lot of time thinking about. And so, we'd just love to get your perspective on, why do you think this misalignment exists, or what are the unseen opportunities here?
Sure. I love this topic. And I got to tell you, it baffles me because if you look at the numbers, if you look at the business, the benefit and the real path to growth comes from retention. And yet you're absolutely right. There's this over orientation toward top of funnel. And I think it is mostly based on 2 things. One is that a lot of people who are leaders tend to have come from more of a hunter orientation, hunter background versus a farmer background. And so they're more used to that like go, sell mentality. And oftentimes they even may have come out of sales and think that that's something that they're really good at. And so that's what they orient toward. So then that's what they prioritize. So I think that's one piece of it. The other piece is that I think sales is just simpler. If you think about selling, it's binary. Did I have a customer? No, 0. Do I now have a customer? Yes, 1. Like going from 0 to 1 is a really clear, easy thing to understand. This salesperson went and did a thing and now we have a guy, right? And so that's easy math. When you start to talk about retention, it gets a lot messier. You have lots of different people that are claiming the success or, pushing away the failure. Why is the customer happy? Well, is it the product? Is it the CS, orientation? Is it the account management orientation? Is it billing? There's all of these different components that come into play. And by the way, there's also how aligned is the conversation that the salesperson had with the reality that the customer is facing. And so that's just simply a messier conversation. And, business people don't like the messy as much as they like the clean. So I think that's why. But if you talk about what drives growth, what's really going to make your company move hit their revenue targets, move to the next level. It's retention.
Yeah, it's the compounding effect of retention. So it takes a ton of effort to acquire a customer. We all know that. We all know that over the last couple of years, everyone got less efficient in acquiring new customers because competition went up and just the economy was different. And so things were harder than they have been. Now, if I have a leaky bucket, then I've got multiple problems. Number one is I'm losing the customer revenue for now. Right. So I used to have a customer. Now I don't have a customer. And by the way, this is true for outright churn or for someone who downgrades. But assuming we're talking about churn, I have a hole I need to fill. But then over time, my growth rate is slowing down because not only am I missing the revenue today, I'm then missing the compounding growth that occurs from those customers over a certain period of time. And so everyone thinks about this in terms of like, well, I've got to fill this gap from a customer. Okay, sure. You actually got to fill the gap and then some because of that compounding effect. And that's even more pronounced when we're talking about profitability. So it's one thing to look at it through the lens of revenue and say, okay, my revenue is X and I lost a customer, so now my revenue is less than that. But from a profitability point of view, your customers are going to be worth a lot more in the future than they are today because you're still recovering the cost of acquisition. And tell me about how you think about that or the conversations that you're seeing about this revenue growth and profit orientation when it comes to retaining customers.
So I think that you're absolutely right. And one additional element that I see in my clients is that onboarding is oftentimes the most challenging period of time for a new customer. And so if you are leaking, then you've got to bring a bunch of new customers through that, challenging part of the relationship and get them to a point where it's smoother sailing. And whereas if you have a better retention rate, then you have more customers that are in the smooth sailing part of the relationship. And so, it's not only all of those things that you talked about, which are absolutely valid, but that you're spending more time, energy, and effort with those customers that are taking up more resources, perhaps being more confused, that kind of thing. So I think, there's all these different elements that lead up to the challenge. And then, of course, when you plug the leaks in your bucket, then every customer that you bring in, every new customer, instead of filling a hole, is growth revenue. It's net new. And so it's not just the downside of plugging the holes, it's the upside of being able to level up.
I like that call out there. And the call out was that, something I hadn't really thought about a lot before, which is if there's a lot of friction and risk in the onboarding phase, then the customer effort is very high at that period. And also the effort to us to get them successfully implemented is very high. If we're spending all of our time there because we're churning out customers, it's just making us less effective at our jobs overall. So we're becoming less efficient, not to mention less profitable. We're also just kind of running around with our hair on fire, which I think is part of the reason that a lot of people say, and I've seen this in your work too, that customer loyalty drives employee loyalty, right? Meaning if the customers are sticking around and they're happy, then that tends to have a very positive effect on the culture and on employee retention as well.
Right. It does. It's fairly straightforward, right? We can imagine the difference between being an employee and managing a bunch of unhappy customers that are in fire drill mode all the time versus being an employee in a well-oiled machine where not only do you know what to do as an employee and you have a clear path to success, but you're able to, shepherd customers through a clear and consistent process and they're having success. And, it's not hard to sort of say, oh, which one would I rather be a part of?
Now, when you look at churn and you work with customers, what's at the root of most of this? Like, there's a simplistic way to say this that hey, I just need to throw more people at the churn problem. I need a bigger account management team. I need more customer success managers. Something like that. I just need to throw people at it. Is that always the answer? What are you seeing in terms of root causes of churn? Is this is there always just going to be kind of this unavoidable amount of churn that's going to happen in any account, or pardon me, in any portfolio? Or are there things that I can start to think about doing when you're working with clients? Are you sort of scoring these into different categories of like, this one was bound to happen and this one happened because it was, something that we did or our product or service? Like, how do you start to think about that?
There's definitely a difference between avoidable churn and unavoidable churn. There are times when a customer, goes out of business, or something happens inside of their organization that, that wasn't a keepable customer for whatever reason. And it's important to be able to identify those. I had a client recently that had like a part of their portfolio moved from one owner to another owner. So one customer to another customer. And the CS team got dinged for the churn, even though they actually they had both customers in their portfolio. So the sales team got the benefit of the sale, and the CS team got dinged for the churn. So sometimes you have to take a step back and say, what's really happening here? And being mindful of unavoidable churn is smart business, and really just being fair to your team. And account managers are going to get pretty shirty if they're being dinged for things that are truly beyond their control. So that's one thing. The other is, this is an example of being able to work smarter, not harder. More people don't always help the situation if there aren't clear and consistent processes that people are able to follow and know how to do their job the way they're supposed to be doing their job. And that's the hole that I see at most of my clients, is that they're being asked to perform tasks of account management that they haven't been given a clear way to do it. And so you've got, everybody doing it differently, or you have everybody reacting to everything like it's a fire drill. You have information and data being captured in different places, in different ways, people using different terminology to talk about the same thing. And that's really confusing for the customer, especially if they get switched from one account manager to another. It's terrible for consistency inside the company. And when that employee goes, they tend, because they don't have that, support infrastructure, a lot of information tends to leave with them. And so there's just all kinds of bad ways that this can impact the company. That's what I see missing. And that's the biggest difference, when you can have those, those clear ways of doing things. Like, this is our way of doing things. And as a company, that's what you want.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, this is one of the glaring differences between the sales team and the account management team, or the sales team and the customer success team. Is, sales team, at least, to a large extent, and certainly in theory, have methodologies and playbooks and things that they are doing, and they've got a CRM that has certain rule sets that enforce this, and so on and so forth. And they have a way of approaching sales, right? So it's like maybe we use MedPick, or maybe we use Medic, or whichever methodology it is, and it kind of comes with the territory. You're a salesperson in my organization. Here's what you're gonna follow. And in the account management world, frankly, I don't know why this is, but in the account management world, it's like everybody's just making it up as they go, right? And you're in the same company, and you've got different versions of even basic stuff like, what does an account plan look like? Like different account plans, and when do we do QBRs, or why do we do QBRs, or account reviews, and any of this stuff. And frankly, it baffles me. And this is one of the problems that we're solving at AMplify, the growth community for account managers, is to try to bring some consistency to this approach. But I find the lack of playbooks and predictability in account management to be a major, major risk factor for most teams. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, playbooks are the lifeblood of my business. And so, that's where I spend, the majority of my time is helping companies create them, because they're so valuable. And, I think not only do salespeople get the playbooks, they get trained on the playbooks. Companies
Yes.
invest in making sure that these playbooks aren't just shiny things that sit around, but are really used inside the company. And that, that's the other piece of it too. It's not just good to have them; you got to use them. and you need to reinforce them. I've just been working on this with a client. How do you embed and refresh the plays, because they aren't static? You have to reinforce it with your team, and then you have to make sure that you're updating plays for the evolving nature of your company. And when you get into that habit, it's actually pretty easy and people enjoy it. It's just habits that you have to create and then uphold inside of a company.
Yeah, I mean, one of the hypotheses I have is one of the reasons there's so much inconsistency within account management teams about playbooks is because there's a lot of player coaches. There are a lot of people who are like, yes, I'm the team VP, I'm the lead, and I have 5 customers that I look after myself or what have you. So they're getting pulled in all sorts of directions, and they're not able to do things like the training and then the reinforcement and setting up the meetings and the cadence that goes around all these things to make them as effective as they could be. That's one of my hypotheses. But otherwise, I look at this and I think this is a huge opportunity for most companies. Like it's a fairly quick fix is, to your point, not only designing, but then implementing and training on just like playbooks for the basic handful of things that we're doing day in and day out.
Yeah. If you have a battle between, strategy and tactics, tactics always win. The fire drill always wins. And so if you are trying to do the management of a team and the management of customers, the customers are always going to be what takes your time, and you're going to cancel that meeting with your team member. And especially if it's a review meeting and, oh, we didn't have to do this one. We'll catch it next time. It's easy to see how bad habits happen. But yet, that way lies madness. And you really need to prioritize having the consistency with your team to make sure that everybody knows what they're doing. And, just repetition, that's how we learn.
Indeed. Now, I want to go deeper into this topic of churn. You've got some really interesting blog posts and some recent LinkedIn articles on 5 mistakes that companies are making when it comes to churn. Basically, things that they're doing that are leading to churn. Right? If you don't do these, you're going to reduce your chance of a customer leaving, essentially. And you outline these 5, which are, I think, really interesting and probably worth going into one by one. But the first one is misunderstanding churn's impact. Now, we've talked about this a little bit already, but what else is in there?
So some of what's in there is really thinking through the numbers. What is it costing you to lose a customer? And it is the cross-functional overview of that impact, because so often what we see is that churn is rolling downhill to the account manager, but really churn is impacted by everybody's decision. And so, and oftentimes the account management team doesn't, they're sort of treated as a cost center. And so it's why it's part of the reason that they don't get the investment in training. It's part of the reason that they, things, when things roll downhill to them, it's harder for them to put their hand up and get the support that they need, because everybody's, focusing on the quote unquote revenue, side of things. Well, this is the revenue side of things. And so by looking at the impact of churn and really being able to isolate the numbers, what is it costing us? Then you can start to tease apart and see what that impact of churn really looks like. And when you can articulate the impact in numbers, it's a lot easier for account management teams to come to the table and say, hey, here's why we need the support that we need. And here's what's at stake. And here's what we're bringing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like everyone's too busy these days to do that kind of analysis. And it's so powerful because what I'm hearing you say is we're essentially buying churn because we don't understand how bad it is for our business. And until we really get a full picture, then we would do everything we could to avoid it, instead of just thinking, oh, every year I'm going to have 10% churn, or whatever the number is. If we really understand the impact, then we're going to do everything we can to not have it happen to us.
And sometimes the C-suite doesn't want to look at churn because it's not the fun part of the picture. They've got to go to the board and make everything look shiny. And, it's a little bit of like, don't look over here. But the reality is the reality. And so when you can share those numbers, and to the point that you made earlier, sometimes even leaders in the company don't understand all of the implications of churn. And so you have an opportunity to, gently educate and share the knowledge and sort of open up the conversation about, what is really happening in our company and what would happen if we were able to fix it. If we can turn it around, and that's where you can have the positive side of the churn conversation. It's not just, bad, bad, bad. It's also, hey, here's the upside potential.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even just thinking about this to what you were saying before, like here's the impact on our professional services team or implementation teams because of the churn, right? They're now overworked because we've got to fill in all these holes. Ali, the second one that you talked about in these 5 mistakes is losing customers due to, frankly, misalignment between the sales and marketing teams, like those up in the funnel, so to speak. So, what do you mean by that?
Well, I sort of alluded to this earlier, is that, the relationship that you have with the customer and their customer experience has to be consistent across the company. It's not just enough to say like, oh, okay, great. Marketing did something really clever with marketing and that attracted the customer. And then sales had a really good conversation. And then we got the customer and, now we have to like service the customer. All of those different components have to be thoughtful and have to be aligned. And I always talk about billing because I think that billing feels like in some ways a throwaway because you just assume it's going to work. But one great way to really antagonize a customer is to mess with their billing. And and so, billing is what they're usually like in a back office somewhere, a windowless room, whatever. But they're critical.
It's a customer touch point. It's a thing.
Yeah, of course. It's a big thing. You're
Yeah.
messing with their money. And so, just be really thoughtful about what are all of the different components that are inputs into the customer experience so that you can start becoming more aligned in what the through line looks like. It is one customer experience, even if you have different departments inside of a company. And so, how can you start to think about that conversation in a way that is aligned, and the company, my company is called Alignment Growth Strategies for a reason, because I find that this alignment is one of the most critical things that you can do in a company to improve the customer experience.
Yeah, awesome. And that's actually a great lead into your point number 3, which is another one of these, churn mistakes is overlooking how chaotic internal processes actually drive customers away. And this is a little bit what we were just talking about. So if my pre-sales experience is dramatically different from my post-sales experience, then that's an issue. If my billing experience sucks, then that's also an issue, for example. And a lot of these are self-inflicted wounds, I'm thinking here, right, around just how do we do what we do? Is the customer really truly at the heart of everything that we're doing, like our website claims it is, for example? What else would you put in that category?
This is playbooks. This is really where you're building out thoughtful step-by-step approaches to the way that you want things done. And it is cross-functional. When I build out playbooks, I'm inviting other departments to the party and asking them to participate, and in an ideal world, getting the C-suite involved in insisting that they participate in making sure that this is an aligned customer experience. And sometimes that works, more smoothly than others, and depending on the company size and the C-suite. But that's the way it really should happen, is that everybody is participating in what one customer experience should look like, and not just in theory, but in practice. Like, here are the steps to the dance, so that when you get a new customer, the internal knowledge transfer is happening. First of all, it's happening, and second of all, it's because that's often the thing that gets pushed aside if how it goes.
I know how it goes. Yeah.
And so then how is it happening? What's the data that the sales team is being held accountable to collecting and sharing? And where does it go? It's not just enough to say, okay, update your notes in Salesforce. You really need to sort of hold a standard of expectation. And so, doing all those things, not just for the initial part of the conversation, but really all the way through the middle part of the relationship, where so often customers get less attention, right? There's lots of attention on
Right.
onboarding, then there's lots of attention when it
At
comes
renewal
time to
time.
renewal
Yeah.
time. But actually building out a plan for the middle, that isn't just about like, okay, we're going to slap you into a QBR and call it done.
Yeah.
How do you do this more thoughtfully? How do you do it more strategically? And really, how do you engage the entirety of the customer experience so that every touch point is getting the customer deeper into the relationship and more engaged, more involved, and more knit into the products and services that your company provides, so that when you get to renewal, it's just a no-brainer. And that's what the playbooks do. It's one step after the other, and being like, okay, here's when you're going to send an email. Here's what you're going to do. This is the template, so that you're not asking people, again, it's work smarter, not harder. Here's a way to cut down on a few minutes, because if I don't have to think about what the template for the email should be, and all I have to do is customize it, that gives me more confidence that I'm doing it right. And it takes less time. And so it's create it once and use it for a long time, versus having every single person in the team have to create their version every time.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, what you're talking about is a pretty, it's a cross-functional effort, sponsored by a senior leader. So this is not like a director of CS or a director of account management, because this is getting the whole company bought into the strategy and frankly, bought into the fact that customer success is a strategy. It's not a tactic, right? It is what we're talking about here. And, within that, who are you looking to drive this? Is this a chief customer officer, chief revenue officer, customer experience person, CEO? Like, how do we actually make this work? Because I can imagine one of the challenges that comes up is you get a lot of buy-in on this project from the customer success or account management teams who are like, yay, let's go do this. And then it just doesn't have enough oomph, or it doesn't percolate widely enough inside the company. So how do you guide us around that to avoid this chaotic internal processes problem?
It is being driven by the C-suite. I'm often hired by the CEO. Sometimes it's a CCO or CRO, but it is being driven by leadership to say this is something that we need. Now, I spend the majority of my time with the account teams, the people that are really boots on the ground with the account. But that reinforcement from above is critical to cross-functional success. Otherwise, it's just too easy for other teams to blow it off.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's why we've got to get the sponsorship from above, and we've got to make it a company strategy. Now, your fourth point here under these 5 churn mistakes is underestimating loyalty's long-term financial value. Is this just the opposite of misunderstanding what churn is costing us, or what are the other kind of things that make loyalty matter in the long term?
I think the first one where we talked about the impact is really thinking through the bigger picture of churn, and we've talked about that at various times in this podcast. And so this one's really running the numbers and in a deeper level. And I have some calculators on the website that let people actually input their numbers and see what the differences look like. What is it really costing your company, and what's the difference it makes when you improve the customer experience and improve retention.
Yeah, and you wrote an awesome book on this called Keep Your Customers, which is all about this exact topic. And one of the things that I'll say about loyalty is people tend to underestimate the advocacy side, right? And using your customers as part of the marketing engine, and the way that generates tremendous positive externalities as you build loyalty. So if you don't keep customers long enough for them to have a good experience with you, then you're missing out on a whole nother marketing engine for yourself as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So true.
Now, your fifth point is politely called staying in the suck. Is this learned helplessness of just like, oh, things are never going to change, and we just adapt to this mediocre way that we have of working? Or what else do you mean by that one?
Yeah, I mean, staying stuck in the suck is really thinking, feeling helpless in what it is that you're doing. And, the point of going through all of these 5 steps is to say, okay, what are you going to do? How are you going to take action? And when you look at the bigness of the problem, it can feel a little overwhelming. And so, it's a little bit about, okay, how do you break this down and start to take it step by step so that as, you're going through it, it doesn't feel big. It feels like, okay, what's the next thing I can do? And we only solve problems in a bite-sized way. It's the old, how do you eat an elephant? Chestnut. One bite at a time, by the way, if you haven't heard that one before. And really, that's part of it. Like how do you get yourself out of this? And it's just by taking action. Was there something else in that one that you were particularly drawn to?
No, I mean, I think that the idea is it's very easy to fall into this trap of like, this is how things are, right? And I work through the systems that might be broken, or I work with the fact that I don't have a playbook, or I don't have a guide, or I don't get the training, or I don't get the support I need, et cetera. I'm just kind of willing to work with it, but so much of what I talk about a lot is reframing how we're approaching a situation. And I think that feeds really well into this, right? Which is just because we're in a suboptimal, sucky state for whatever, doesn't mean that we have to accept it, and doesn't mean that we can't be the navigators for ourselves and our careers to get through this, and to come up with more ideas and better ways to think about it. And actually, on this point, there's been a lot of discussion around playbooks, and can we systematize our work, and how do we really, part of the undercurrent there is like, how do we really orient toward the customer? Can we put the customer really at the target or the bullseye of what it is that we're doing on a day in, day out basis? And I want to chat a little bit about how you think about this, because one of the ways to approach it, which we've all seen a million times, is just like checklists. Okay, here's the playbook for this and this and this, and everything is very sort of like clinical, and it's just things I need to be doing. The other thing that we need to not lose track of is the heart side of things, right? Meaning the emotional connection with our customer, the experience they're having of us. Even things like the energy that we are bringing into QBRs or account reviews or what have you. And so I'm curious about how you help people connect with that part of their work, because you look at this type of change initiative, it's a big deal. There's so many moving parts, and you can kind of do it the clinical way, or you can really go all in and make it actually work.
I love this question. In my book, Keep Your Customers, one of the fundamental premises is that in order to deliver a great customer experience, you need 2 things. You need the smart, right? You need to have these systems and processes. You need to have tracking and metrics. You need to, have all of the systemization in order to make the machine work. But you also have to have this heart. And I love that you used that word. It's the combination of heart and smart, where the heart is, how are you making people feel seen, heard, and valued? And that is, your team, that is the customers. And how are you building that in too? Part of my playbooks actually include, how are you celebrating customer successes?
Nice.
And that is one of those little things that makes a really big difference, because it's so easy to skip that stuff. It's so easy to be like,
Yeah,
okay, so
it
here's
is.
your numbers and on to the next thing, or welcome aboard and let's get going.
Mm-hmm.
And when you don't become intentional about like, this is a moment where you can like stop, take a breath, and really celebrate the success that they just had, like get the win in there and make them feel great about it.
Right.
It's and when people do that, it really is this moment of like, oh yeah, we did that,
Mm-hmm.
and cheers for us. And that's, I'm looking at your face and you're smiling, right?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Because it is something that makes people smile, and when you can get your customers smiling, that's a good thing.
Yeah. And so what are the things that you're having to guide leaders through to connect in that way with their teams? It may not come naturally to some people. Like some people are going to be like, quick adopters of this, and they probably do it already. But others might need some guidance and coaching. And so how do you work with someone to really tap into that?
So I have one of my favorite lines in the book is culture is a habit. And I really do believe, and what I've really seen in my career is that it's the things that happen consistently that become the culture of the company. And even if it is, something as small as, we ring a bell when a new sale comes in, or even better, we ring the bell when good things happen in lots of different departments inside the company. The things that we do to elevate lots of different people and lots of different departments in a company and not just front end sales. Those are the things that make everybody feel really valued. And sometimes it's just as simple as saying, okay, what are some ideas here? What are things that we can do? And they haven't thought about it before. They may do nothing. A lot of my clients, when I start working with them, they really don't have celebration on the menu. And the first thing that they talk to, or like if they do anything at all, it is ringing the bell when there's a new customer. And revenue's good. You got to have new customers. That's important. But what else? Because this is the fun part. And what are some fun, really interesting, it's just the way you do it, things that that you can do. One of my clients was an ed tech company, and we went through a process that I outlined in the book called creating a bullseye. And it is a mantra that articulates your customer's unique approach to your company's unique approach to customers. So it's not your mission, vision, values, which tend to be about you, but it's really like, who are you as you show up for customers? And they created a bullseye, and without going into all of the nuts and bolts, they ended up getting so into it. They created branding around it. They created plush dolls that were specific to it. They gave out the plush dolls, and then they went one step further and had exercises of using the plush dolls. And it really became a part of of their unique culture. And all of that on behalf of the customers. And it's a really powerful way of driving culture and getting people excited about who you are and what you do in a way that supports the customer experience.
My reaction to that is it's such a powerful link between what we do as account managers and how we drive overall revenue and go to market for the company. And here's what I mean by that. If we can get really good at this bullseye that you're talking about, if we get really good at our customer experience and our account management, that can actually turn into a competitive advantage for us in new sales, right? So just being able to go as part of a sales process and say to the prospect, oh, hey, by the way, when you become a customer, here's the 10 things that we're going to do. And we even call it this, and here's our branding, and et cetera. You bring, first of all, that enthusiasm, but mainly you're then giving the customer all this comfort. They're like, oh, they've got me. They understand this. They know what they're doing. And I think, if I were to think of one thing that is holding so many account management or so many companies back from getting this right, it's seeing account management as their competitive advantage. Like how they treat their customers and how they work with their customers should be helping them to unlock so many more opportunities.
Yeah, that's literally happening in one of my clients right now. And it has become a game changer in their conversations because they have a very complex onboarding. It is a, deep and multifaceted technology. And so for somebody to give up their old world and move into their world is a big deal. And the onboarding is the question that everybody's asking. And by making the work that I did with them their competitive advantage, and it does have a name and they do have really cool branding around it, it's changing the conversations with prospects and making the whole sales conversation and the entire account management piece just a lot smoother.
Yeah, that is so awesome. That's such a great example that they're setting. And I want to see more companies. I want to see more companies doing this. So, Ali, this has been great because we've talked about sort of these misperceptions of churn or the lack of true accounting on what churn means and on what loyalty means. And we talked about some of these ways that we can reorganize our internal processes and communications to create a better experience for the customer by putting the customer literally in the bullseye center of everything that we do. And we touched a little bit, but not a ton on these playbooks. But just in wrapping up here, I'm curious to get your impression on this question. Like if someone is saying, I know we need to do something, I know we need to start somewhere, I want to improve my customer retention, I want to reduce churn. What is the first playbook that you are suggesting? What is the first step in that process?
It's a great question. It varies from company to company. And sometimes the thing that they think is the part that hurts the hardest or hurts the most isn't actually the place that they're getting the pain. So let me say that in a story. I was brought in to fix a retention problem. Our renewal rate isn't good enough. Fix the leaky bucket. And what I ultimately discovered in working with the company was that they didn't have a retention problem. They had an onboarding problem, and they were getting people in on a 1-year contract, and the onboarding was not working to the point that like they really weren't getting adoption. They really weren't getting, sort of a true implementation. And so,
and then the renewal's up and the customer's like, I don't see any difference here. Why bother?
Right. But they hadn't lost the company. They hadn't lost the account at renewal. They had lost it at onboarding. So, just really evaluate where you're having your biggest pain, not where you're necessarily feeling your biggest pain, because that may just be renewals, but where are things truly going pear-shaped, and start there. And, build a library of playbooks one at a time. You can't necessarily like snap your fingers and have everything done if you're trying to do it internally. I mean, of course, the greatest way to get this done is to bring somebody in who can be objective about what's happening at the company and isn't pulled into the political side of things. That's probably the best way to deliver really great playbooks that are going to sort of have a more objective overview of what's happening inside of a company. But if you're trying to DIY it, which is great, then start where you can and build from there. Pick one area and build from there.
Yeah, I mean, even hearing you say that, I'm thinking back to this comment that we made that so many VPs are totally overworked and they're doing player coach already. This is probably not the time to DIY it. It's the time to rely on experts and bring in people who have expertise and who don't have the history and all the other perspectives, so you can go out there and ask the right questions and figure out what's actually going on. And I also really like your call out about don't do all the playbooks at once. So it can be very tempting to say, I need to fix our entire process, top to bottom. And you wind up with, 8 different playbooks and all this stuff. And it just overwhelms everybody. And I think, I would think you're much better off picking one. So if you get a sense, hey, we think our challenge is in onboarding, great. What can we do about that? We think our challenge is in the middle part of the customer journey, where after onboarding and before renewal, then great. Maybe we focus on something there. But like understanding those and just getting a little bit better at one thing first, as opposed to trying to go do tons and tons of different projects and exercises.
Right. And sometimes it's even, onboarding is too big, right? Sometimes it's just like, we're just going to focus on the handover from sales to account management. We're just going to focus on, training the customers in our product. So, you like, if it feels overwhelming, make it smaller and just, again, one bite at a time. And to, going back to what we said earlier, it's all about embedding it. And so, refine it, refresh it, refine it, and reinforce it.
Fantastic. Well, Ali Cudby, thanks so much for joining us. Everyone, check out Alignment Growth Strategies and check out the book, Keep Your Customers, that Ali wrote. It's amazing. Highly recommended for everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast for this really in-depth look at churn and how we're thinking about it.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation.